He watched the way she signed coffee, and Mrs. Corsetti signed back, small, protective, signed, smiling, never rush. He noticed the tremor that crossed Lily's face when a table laughed too loudly, a movement like a smudge across polished glass. Dante had a reputation that made people uneasy, generosity traded in small, deliberate units, favors arranged like dominoes. The city called him a broker of favors. His reputation in the families called him something more complex. There was an edge to him that did not need to be shown. It lived in the exactness of his gait. He came to the restaurant because his father liked the quiet rooms and the company of those who did not prick them. He stayed because he had been watching Lily for weeks, the way one watches a bird build a nest inside a clockwork. The moment of recognition was almost ridiculous in its domesticity. Lily wiped down the top of a wine service cart. A splinter of light fell on the stem of a glass. For a beat, she thought herself invisible. Dante walked past, and the world made the wrong kind of noise, something like a bowl cracked in slow motion. He saw a scar at the base of her thumb. It was a small thing, hardly worth anyone's attention, except that he had seen the same mark once, years ago, on the hand of a picture that had gone missing from a mantelpiece in the north side, the same crease that belonged to someone named Corsetti, and also to someone who had stepped away from nights that ended badly. He paused with his hand on the back of a chair, as if the simplest tilt of his wrist might undo the universe. Lily felt the attention like a draft. She straightened. Her hands betrayed her. Fingers hovered like birds, unsure of the wire. He came for a table, but asked for none. He asked for the name of the woman who had just left, then for a glass of the house red. And when Lily brought it, his fingers brushed hers for a fraction of an instant, an accidental contact that was not accidental at all. The touch said what neither of them would speak. We are both cataloging things that might break us. After his departure, the kitchen smelled of caramelized onions and sweat. Lily retreated to the bar with a stack of receipts, hands folding like small maps. She counted to 10 in her head, as she sometimes did when she was a child, and the arguments downstairs had become dinner. Counting did not study the tremor that lived under her breast. At 22, she had learned to be very good at erasing the lines that declared where she came from. At school, she was a scholarship girl with a careful laugh. At home, she was the daughter of a man who had cultivated respect the way other people tended roses. Her father, Patrick O'Malley, ran his authority with the steady cruelty of tradition. He believed in people knowing their place, and in loyalty being an unstated contract. He also loved his family with a devotion that had the wrong ends. Lily had never been entirely sure whether his tenderness was protection or purchase. She had chosen, for years, the small rebellions. College classes, part-time work, the secretive tenderness of proving herself to strangers on a stage of servers and silver. Those choices had allowed her to walk on the edges of two worlds. Dante came back the next week. He sat in the corner where the light made grooves in the leather, and he watched her sign to Mrs. Corsetti again. He had the look of a man rehearsing an apology. He called for a plate of pasta he did not eat, and when the room thinned, he got up and walked over like a man wanting to fold a map the right way. "You're new to the night shift," he said, without preamble, leaning close enough that the heat from his coat skinned Lily's temple. She was trained to deflect. "We rotate," she replied, the words precise and small. Dante watched her hands. "You signed to the Corsetti woman." Lily's jaw worked, that old muscle that learned to swallow anger. She asked for it. He smiled, the kind that asked for things without naming them. "Not why I came. Tell me, do you like being somewhere people think they can't see you?" It was a question sharpened on the inside. Lily thought of all the ways people had stopped seeing her. Classmates at orientation who didn't know where her scar came from, professors who skimmed past before name tags could become anything more, faces at home that softened when she recited a line approved by him. The night had taught her invisibility as survival. Sometimes, she said slowly, sometimes it's easier. Sometimes it isn't, Dante said. He left a card on the bar, not a business card, not quite, but thick paper with a number and a single word, ask. When he pushed it toward her, his finger brushed her knuckle with a gentleness that felt like a benediction and a risk at once. It would have been a fine, forgettable thing if not for Flanagan. Sean Flanagan had once been a soldier beneath someone else's banner. He was the kind of man who learned fast that brutality would get him further than charm. He chafed at the rules, at the payoffs that took too long. He wanted power, and he wanted it now. When someone began to whisper that Lily might be more valuable than a server, he listened. People who wanted to climb never shirked the work of looking for loose threads. Word travels in narrow ways in the city. A comment overheard near a bar, a letter slipped behind a ledger. Flanagan assembled rumors as if building a house with borrowed nails. He found Lily's name in a ledger of favors and, with a few clumsy threats and 2 careless men, learned she had a father with influence. He built leverage from that knowledge. He found an image from a family album and got the rest of the pieces to fit. When she realized he was watching, realized that the watching had moved from a friend of a friend to a threat, her chest narrowed to the size of a fist. Someone in the room asked for a table, and the hands moved. She signed a dessert suggestion to an elderly man and felt a coldness pool under her skin. That night, she stayed late, counting receipts until her eyes blurred. On the walk to the subway, she imagined the worst versions of how things might end and tried to file them in a drawer labeled "Not Tonight." She told herself she was being ridiculous. She told herself 1,000 other small lies. Dante's next visit was not casual. He found her by the coat rack as she was cinching her apron. "You should go home through the front door," he said. Home was a shorthand that meant the apartment above the bakery on Holloway, a small, slant-roofed place with a radiator that clanged at dawn and a neighbor who played trumpet at ungodly hours. It was also the place where Patrick expected his children to sit at the same table on Sundays. The front door was the route a daughter takes when she wants to be seen. Lily laughed once, a small sound like a breaking twig. "You want me to come through the front door so the whole neighborhood can watch me come home?" "Yes," he watched her face. "People watch what they fear, but sometimes they watch so long they think they own you. I don't want them to own you." His voice had the softness of concealed things. He was both a man who brokered favors and the sort of person who kept his standard hands for his own private code. Lily wanted to ask why he cared. She did not. Instead, she took the card he gave her and folded it into the pocket of her apron like a rosary. The small mercy he offered came a few evenings later when a courier slid a sealed envelope into her bag while she was making a delivery to Table 9. The paper smelled faintly of tobacco in winter. Inside was a photograph, an old family photo, edges softened, someone's handwriting on the back. Lily, age 8, cheeks full, hands making a clumsy sign. The handwriting was Patrick's. Lily froze. The restaurant's noise receded. Her heart moved in odd staccato beats. The photograph was an accusation and a proof, both. No one had meant for that image to find her. It had the weight of a trap and the clarity of a mirror. 2 nights later, a man broke both the glass on an alleyway window and the rhythm of their lives. He did not come to the front door. He came with the kind of silence that carries the knowledge of silence as a tool. He left a message for Patrick, a simple thing, a phone battery leaking a single video file. It was the sort of message that telegraphed ownership, showing up at the edges of the life of someone else and asking for payment. Patrick did not answer at first. He took the phone, the hands of a man who had learned to measure rounds by the number of breaths he allowed, and he watched with a patience that suggested he was assembling plans. Later, in the dark of the study, he found Lily sitting on the windowsill, the photograph folded between her fingers like a caution. She had kept her silence for as long as she could. "Why did you bring that here?" he demanded. His voice had no theatrics. It was the controlled sternness of a man who had never been denied. "It was slipped in my bag," Lily said. Her hands shook. Her signs were smaller now, careful. She did not want to add to the ledger of transgressions. "Someone is watching me." Patrick softened, briefly, to the image of the child holding the clumsy sign. For a man who'd spent his life trading in authority, tenderness was a rare commodity. He crossed the room and set his hand on her shoulder, not as a director, but as someone who wanted to fix a thing that broke. "This is nothing," he said, but in the tone of a man refusing the truth, the refusal insisting he could still control the outcome. Dante did not disappear. He started to build an architecture of presence, small check-ins, a burner phone left under a loose brick in an alleyway with a message that read simply, "Safe route." He placed, once, a small packet on her kitchen table, a cheap lighter, a list of safe houses he had vetted, a single strawberry jam cookie from a bakery he knew her to like. The gesture was more intimate than any card, and more dangerous. Lily read the list 3 times and then burned the paper in the sink because burning felt like a promise kept. Flanagan's push accelerated when it became clear to him that Lily had currency. He moved like a man who believes in the economy of threats, a whispered rumor to a cousin, a late-night knock at a bodyguard's door, an envelope of money left on a stoop with a message that said, in fewer words than appropriate, "We can make this easier." Men who trafficked in fear thought fear itself a commodity. They did not reckon with loyalty the way Lily did. One evening in late November, a week before the city's holiday lights would hang their false promises in windows, Tommy, Lily's younger brother, caught a ride home later than he should have. He had not yet learned discretion. He still moved like an adolescent who believed himself invisible. When he arrived, 2 men leaning against a brownstone told him someone needed to remember their line. They spoke of debts in the language of threats. They wanted to be heard. Tommy came to the restaurant the next day with a face that broke light into 100 small shards. He sidled into the back where Lily rinsed cutlery. She looked at him, and in the way only siblings can, read the whole conversation behind his eyes. He handed her a folded note that shook as if it had a fever. She took it. The word inside was a demand dressed as an option. Deliver evidence, or the family would learn a lesson. This is the place where choices gather, she thought, in the white of a plate, in the line of a receipt, in the way a hand closes. She felt the old ledger open like a wound. If she told her father, if she told Patrick, would he protect her or make the ledger heavier? The knowledge of his influence carried both shelter and risk. For all his love, Patrick had cultivated enemies, the way a gardener cultivates roses, beautiful but sharp. Lily called Dante that night. The phone lit the kitchen in a blue that made the radiator look like a long tooth. He answered with his usual economy. His voice sounded like a man who had been expecting to be useful. Did he touch him? Tommy's eyes had a bruise-colored truth. They said, "Deliver, Lily." She thought of the photograph in her pocket, of the image of a child who had wanted to make hands speak. She thought of the week ahead, the restaurant's holiday bookings, the family dinner scheduled at the O'Malley house on Christmas Eve, the whole city leaning toward a holiday that asked for peace it seldom delivered. She imagined Patrick in his jacket, checking the lock on the study, making plans he believed unassailable. "I'll be there," Dante said, as if it were settled. "Tomorrow. Let him sleep tonight." Lily did not sleep. She watched the city rain on the window like a kind of punctuation. She cataloged every small thing she would need to do if she left. Cash, the scholarship paperwork she could not lose, the address of Mrs. Corsetti who would take a message. She thought of the ways a van could turn, because the city had the look of maps and exits where a person might dissolve. She thought of disappearing as an art form and also as a brutal necessity. She thought of the shame that would come like condensation after, no matter the reason. At dawn, she went to work and moved through the night like a woman made of glass. The restaurant's soft gold light camouflaged her. Guests left pleased, and none of them knew the ledger that had been opened in the folds of the family album. During her break, she smoothed the photograph with an almost reverent care, and then tucked it into the lining of her coat. She had a plan that was not a plan. Vanish before dinner, so Patrick would not have a final chance to bargain with the ledger's weight. She would take Tommy, she would take what papers she could, and she would disappear into the places Dante had arranged. But disappearance is a thing of logistics and emotion in equal measure. It meant leaving behind a father whose anger could be as thorough as his grief. It meant a crime of omission that would read, to some, like betrayal. It meant choosing between the safety of a silence and the ruin of exposure. The night before Christmas Eve, Lily walked out of the restaurant and took the long way home. The city hung its lights like bright mistakes. She stopped at a corner where the rain had gathered in a shallow dish and watched a taxi pass, its taillights red as a line of small authority. She thought of Mrs. Corsetti's hands, how the older woman had once signed for courage with a flick that was both economy and blessing. Lily cupped her own hands and tried to make the sign she had not made since she was 8. She left a note on her pillow, a single line written in ink that bled like confession. I'm sorry. For a moment, she considered leaving a line that said, I did it for you, but the sentence felt too shaped and neat. Love is not always tidy. Duty is not always a straight road. When the O'Malley house realized she was not there, the reaction moved like a ripple that became a wave. Patrick called her a dozen times and then 100. He asked questions he had never asked before, words threaded with panic. Where are you? Who took you? Why? He moved from phone to car to the street outside the bakery where she had been seen last. He walked the night like a man who had traded his certainty for something that screamed. He went to Dante's building before dawn. Dante opened his door with a face that held the exact reserve of a man who had known this could happen. Patrick did not wait for civility. He crossed the threshold with the weight of a man collapsing into action and found himself on his knees the way men do when they have exhausted their tools. Please, Patrick said, and the single word carried all the inventory of a man who had been a fortress. He looked small in the doorway, an older man who now needed to bargain, not with other men, but with a claim he could not fathom. One chance. Find her. Bring her home. I'll do anything. Dante's eyes were two exact instruments. He could have measured Patrick's desperation and used it to count debt. He could have given this father a list of conditions. Instead, he looked at him like a man seeing the raw heart beneath armor and said, quietly, no bargains. I will find her. There it was, the pleading that matched the title they would later give to the story, if stories are ever fluent enough to hold the truth. Patrick, the man who held power in his jaw and expected others to bow their necks, had come looking for a favor that money could not buy. He had come with the stripped thing men call prayer. Dante rose and handed him a cell phone, one that did not trace well and that could be used to read a map without making the map a confession. Start with who she trusts, Dante said. Start with the Corsetti house. I'll pull records, but not at the cost of her choice. Patrick clenched the phone as if he could feel the line between choice and compulsion through its plastic. Find her, he said. Please, Dante. One chance. Outside, the city breathed, and the lights flickered over pavements sticky with the last of December rain. Somewhere, a radio hummed a carol that sounded more like a warning. Inside the small apartment, the family name sat like a ledger in an open drawer. Men like Patrick did not often beg. When they did, it changed people. Far away from the kitchen's heat and the O'Malley house's tight plans, Lily was already on the move. She had taken the photograph, the scholarship papers, the small packet Dante had left, and a bus ticket with a destination that read like hope in print. She had said goodbye to a world and to a father with the tight-lipped courage of someone who has placed family first and chosen flight to keep them whole. Someone saw her on a late bus leaving the city, an old woman with a memory who remembered hands. She waved, but Lily did not turn. The people who watched a woman leave in the smallest hours of winter often decipher meaning where there is none. For some, it would become a myth, for others, an indictment. Patrick searched the city like a man who had lost the North. He called men who owed him favors and men who resented him. He offered things and he offered apologies. He held the phone to his ear and listened to a variety of layers. Someone promising, someone deflecting, someone sending a single piece of news and then a truth. He walked the docks and the warehouses, the places a man with means might avoid if he wanted to be unseen. He visited Mrs. Corsetti and signed, with the clumsy humility of one who had kept his distance from tenderness, a question that had no easy answer. Dante combed records and watched cameras with a patience that matched a man who had nothing else but his capacity to make silent moves. He found, in the static of a security feed, a shape leaving a bus terminal. He traced it to a motel near the lake. He did not run in with guns blazing. Dante had rules, as did Patrick. The city is made of bones and choices. You break only what you must to save a person who chooses to be saved. Lily sat, for a stretch of hours that felt like a small exile, on the motel bed, hands folded over the photograph like a talisman. She thought of what it meant to vanish before a family meal meant to be sanctified by ritual and roast. It felt like betrayal to some part of her. It felt like salvation to another. She had chosen the margins where she might keep everyone breathing. When Patrick finally found the motel, because someday even a man who leads must follow clues that sting, he stood in the doorway with Dante at his side and the weight of a man who had come to ask for an impossible thing. He saw her there, small in a chair like a figure from an old photograph, and he wanted to rush forward and fold this daughter into himself. He contained himself. The Christmas lights outside the window wavered like a distant altar. Lily saw him first, and rose with a steadiness that spoke of a life pared down to the essentials. There was no grand embrace. There was only the small machinery of making a decision and the real raw face of consequence. Patrick's eyes were moist. He said her name as if it were a prayer and an accusation in one breath. "You shouldn't have come," she signed before she could speak, a habit of making safety with hands. Her voice came after, raw and small. "You promised you'd keep us safe." "I tried," he said. His words were blunt fragments, not always the way you would have wished. They stood like that for a long breath, the father and the daughter, with Dante watching the room like a guardian who knows the price of stepping across lines. Outside, the city held its breath, the kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something huge. Men in other parts of the city moved to their own rhythms, Flanagan plodding, lieutenants checking lists, Mrs. Corsetti sitting at her kitchen table and signing to no one in particular that she was worried. The ledger of debts had widened, and everyone could see the margins where the ink might bleed. Patrick knelt again, not with the same tone as before, but with a resolve that is not a bargain, but an action. No deals, no bargains. I will make this right. He looked at Dante like he was asking for something that was not about leverage. One chance to show he could be different. Dante nodded. "One chance," he said. He did not say what form that chance would take. He did not need to. The promise sat between them like a map. They left the motel together, Patrick with the heavy knowledge of a man who had almost lost the thing he had been building his life around, Dante, the enforcer with a soft spot for repairs, and Lily, who had already made the choice to step away in hopes of keeping the family whole. The night closed around them, and the city unfolded with the slow inevitability of consequences. Somewhere, under the fog of the lake, decisions were already making themselves into actions. Men were moving, and a confrontation that could have been one of many things, pity, violence, reconciliation, loomed like a storm front on the horizon. Hands that had signed for courage would soon have to act. The holiday calendar continued to fill in the empty spaces, a dinner uncelebrated, lights that kept their vigil. Lily had vanished before Christmas dinner, and a Mafia boss, Patrick O'Malley, was searching the city, begging for one chance. He had his pride and his remorse in equal measure. He had also found, in Dante, a stranger who would not compromise dignity for control. What none of them yet knew was how the evidence on a flash drive, the whisper of a betrayal in a lieutenant's ear, and the fragile trust between a man like Dante and a girl like Lily would assemble into the night they could not predict. The choices would not be clean. Some people would vanish in a way that left explanations. Others would pay invisible prices that would rearrange their lives. For now, there was only movement. Dante calling contacts, Patrick walking the wet streets with a map in his head, Lily folding her hands around a photograph and deciding that love is sometimes the act of stepping into a distance to keep others safe. The city watched, and the lights blinked like hearts that would not stop. They would come to terms. They would come to violence and bargaining. They would find, in the end, that some things could be repaired and others could not. But on that night, with the bus smell and the motel's hum, the three of them held the slender hope that the meeting place could be a place of repair, and the ledger waited to see who would sign the next entry. They walked toward the river road, where the lamps pooled like tired suns. Dante kept to the shadows, watching the alleys. Patrick moved slower now, each footfall a punctuation. Lily folded the photograph and slid it into her coat, fingers steady. He stopped beneath a bare light and, without flourish, turned his palm up. In it sat the small black drive, proof and poison together. A car eased out of the darkness. Men spilled from it like smoke. Flanagan's voice came first, soft and sure. Patrick lifted his chin. "Take it," he said. "Settle it." For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then, shoes on gravel, a laugh that was almost relief, and a gunmetal quiet that meant everything could still go either way. Flanagan smiled without humor, a thin horizon of teeth. "You hand it over," he said, "and we leave you breathing." Patrick's hand trembled as he held the drive. The light above them hummed. Lily's fingers flexed against the photograph in her coat, as if she could fold memory into something smaller and easier to carry. Dante stepped forward half a pace and stopped. He could have moved like a machine, push, shove, take, but he did not. His voice was low enough that the river swallowed most of it. "Nobody needs to die tonight," he said. "You want proof. You want ink. Take it and get gone." Flanagan's laugh was a shard. "You think I'd leave with nothing to show for it?" From the car, one of Flanagan's lieutenants, an anxious man with a scar along his jaw, moved like a predator that had been given permission. His hand closed for the drive. Before his fingers reached Patrick's palm, Lily stepped out. Everyone looked at her as though they had been waiting for that motion for a long time. She was suddenly very small beneath the lamp, and very large in the way people shrink when decisions pass through them. "I won't let you take him," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I won't let you take him and use him again." Flanagan cocked his head. "Then you can come with us. No." Lily's eyes found Patrick's. "Dad, don't bargain. If you give them the drive, they will only want what comes after. They'll never stop." Patrick's jaw moved. The confession that had not fit inside him before now spilled in fragments. I thought I could buy back what I broke. He swallowed. "I won't make you sorry again." The drive was warm in his hand, as if it carried heat from too many late hours and sharp decisions. For a moment, he considered the ledger. the signatures, the pale scratching of debt that might be undone if the right person simply looked. Then he folded his fingers and, with a motion like a benediction, let the drive fall to the ground, then kicked it so it spun and flew over the river wall. It skittered toward the dark water and disappeared, a small black comet swallowed at once by the river. For a stunned second, everyone held their breath. Flanagan's face closed like a vault. "You idiot," he hissed. "You throw money away and you think—" Dante had not expected that. He had expected bargaining, maybe a fight, perhaps a long, cold exchange. He had not imagined Lily destroying the thing that might have been the key to everything. But what followed was not the lawless triumph Flanagan had rehearsed. A dull echo came from the far end of the road, two sharp, mechanical sounds, followed by a light that jumped from the horizon like a second sun. Sirens, far off at first, then very present. Dante's contacts had been people who owed him less than gratitude and more than fear. He had not spoken to the city to ask for mercy, but to set in motion a net that would close when it needed to. It closed now. Flanagan's men cursed and fumbled toward the wall. One of them disappeared into the dark bank after the drive. Others drew weapons and pointed them without finesse. Flanagan's hand found a pistol. His jaw worked. The world took on the acute smell of wet earth and hot metal. Patrick stepped forward between the men and the bank, palms open. "Stop," he said. "This is on me. Take me instead." He lifted his chin in a smooth, old-fashioned way. If he could choose martyrdom, it would be with pride. "Take me. Take my freedom. I'm the man who signed. I'm the man who—" "No," Lily said, reaching for him. "No, you won't." Dante moved then with the focus of someone who had lived at the edge of movement long enough to make it feel like a second language. He went to Patrick, took his shoulders, and put a hand on his chest as if feeling for a pulse. "You can go," he said quietly, the edges of his voice soft and hard in the same breath. "Go and tell the truth. Take whatever they want you to take. Tell them that you were the one who failed. Tell them who tried to fix it. Let it stop here." Flanagan shouted, a sound like somebody smearing a match into a drain. The lieutenant, who had moved for the drive, returned, hands empty and wet, cursing. "It's gone," he spat. "She threw it. She's—" "Arrest them," Flanagan ordered. But the command was less a plan and more an assertion of ownership in a world that had slipped away from his control. The first police car rolled up onto the shoulder, lights painting the water in blue and red. Two uniformed officers stumbled out, breath visible in the cold. Behind them came a plain car with a state badge that made Flanagan's men look older at once. Dante did not need to explain. He had told the people who could answer questions, important ones, about ledgers, about names, about who had signed and who had paid. He had not given them the drive. He had given them patience and proof that patience could be weaponized. One officer moved straight for Flanagan. "Thomas Flanagan?" "You are under arrest for conspiracy and extortion," she said. Her voice carried the authority of people who had been given the right badge to stop people like him. Flanagan's eyes found her like a blind man finding a threshold. Flanagan's men made a sound that was half outrage and half calculation. One of them tried to pull a gun. The world quickened, the small, precise violence of trained hands. The lieutenant, who had once whispered betrayal in a shadow's ear, found himself pushed to the pavement, a boot at his shoulder and a cuff on his wrist. Hands that had been poised for ownership flattened in defeat. Patrick watched the scene with a strange relief flooding his face. He did not fight the officers when they took his arms. He let Lily touch his face once, clumsily, as if rehearsing absence. "Be safe," he told her, meaning every small piece of the life he had not made safe before. "Make it better." Lily's eyes filled with something that had the shape of grief and the color of a future without him. "I will," she said. I swear to you." Dante folded his hands before the nearest officer, not because he feared the cuffs, but because he respected the orderliness of things that could be made to move. "If you need statements," he said, "I will give them. There are names you should follow." The arrest of Flanagan was not a cinema of triumph. It was procedural, ugly in its efficiency, and inside it there was an unmistakable quiet. The ledger still had scratching to do, and there were payments that would never be called back. But the arrest was a hinge that began to swing a door. As the constables led Flanagan and his men to the cars, the lieutenant with the scar sneered in Patrick's direction and spat. "You think you saved anyone? They'll be the ones to take the fall, not him. He'll talk." Patrick looked at him, and for a moment the old contempt rose like wind over a cliff. Then he bowed his head. "Maybe," he said, "maybe that's what I deserve." The officers took statements. The river kept flowing, ignorant and implacable. The thing Lily had shattered, the drive, was gone under the black water, swallowed like a secret told in the wrong room. But Dante had been careful. He had made copies in pockets of trust. He had sent proof to people who would not let the ledger stay crooked once they saw the names. The city had mechanisms that were not clean, but were the only possible recourse when men like Flanagan thought themselves sovereign. When the cars left with their blue lights and the men in cuffs, the river road looked emptier and somehow larger. Patrick stood for a long moment, then turned to Lily and Dante. "Forgive me," he said, simply, a thing that did not ask for absolution so much as offer a last, true gesture of ownership of his mistakes. Dante did not say the words that would make it lighter. He placed a hand on Patrick's shoulder, an old habit, the same hand that had steadied engines and men. "You did what you could," Dante said. "That's all anyone can ask." Patrick allowed that, and then the officers walked him to the waiting cruiser. Lily watched until the taillights rolled away, and then sat on the river wall, her fingers empty, the photograph folded and warm against her palm. Dante sat beside her and did not force conversation. Night had a way of pulling words into the corners. When at last Lily spoke, her voice was small against the wash of the river. "Did we do the right thing?" Dante looked at her in the lamplight. "You made a choice," he said. "It kept the ledger from being used like a weapon. It might have cost us the ticket to vindication, but it kept us what we needed, each other." Lily laughed once, a short, surprised thing. "That's the most adult thing anyone has ever said," she muttered. Dante's grin was brief. "I am not sure about the adult part," he said, "but I know about keeping people alive." They walked back toward the city. The lights of houses blinked in windows, some turned off, some lit by TVs, some by lonely lamps. There were dinners that had been canceled and tables that had been set for ghosts. There was a ledger that would need pages sewn into it. There were men who would look over shoulders and wonder what had happened that night. Flanagan would answer questions. Others would scramble to salvage what they could. Patrick's signature would be in the record, and no one could unsubscribe that cost. Weeks later, word spread in small, sensible ways. Indictments filed, men summoned to testify, Mrs. Corsetti's ledger examined in a small, humming office by someone who believed in paper. Lily found no neat absolution. She found visits, awkward, purposed, at an institutional building with thick glass and a list of visiting hours. Patrick kept his head up in the narrow rooms, and each time Lily left, she felt both lighter and heavier. Dante returned to his life of small repairs. He fixed a radiator that winter, he mended a generator hose, and he kept a careful watch on the ledger, as if its margins were a seam he could still stitch. He visited when he could. He did not preach. He calibrated, he fixed, he held. The city did not become a different place overnight. Men who had lived by fear learned, in small increments, to fear something else, scrutiny perhaps, or the quiet necessity of testimony. True power, they found, could be fragile when exposed to light. On a spring morning months later, Lily stood on the river road where the lamps pooled like tired suns. She had folded the photograph differently, its edges softened. Patrick was still serving the reckonings he had owed. His eyes had a clarity that did not pretend to erase the past. Dante leaned against the wall a few steps away, arms crossed, keeping his casual sentry. They watched the water together, a small, unlikely family assembled from wreckage and stubborn hope. The ledger had been opened and inspected and catalogued. Names had been called out in rooms where men with official voices made it sound less like a shame show and more like a correction. It would not make everything right. It would not restore what had been taken from lives built on trust misplaced. But it would be a record that certain things were now seen. Lily slipped her hand into Patrick's before the visit ended. "Be careful," she whispered. "I will," he said. "I've got something left to do." He did not specify what, but there was a steadiness in him that belonged to the work of repair. Dante watched them with the sort of approval that had nothing to do with judgment and everything to do with survival. He had been an instrument of lines and loyalties. He had been asked once to enforce fear, and had chosen, finally, a different kind of enforcement, one for keeping fragile things from being used until they broke. They left the river together, pace matched to pace, and the city bent obligingly away around them, holding its small, ordinary things. The ledger remained, its pages open like a hand that had been given something honest to carry. Men would continue to make choices. Some would sign for courage and grow into it. Others would learn to live under the scrutiny of consequence. Light pooled on the pavement as they passed beneath the street lamps. Lily folded the photograph and slid it into her coat. Patrick walked with a quiet dignity. Dante walked with the watchfulness of a man who had been given a map and had learned how to read it without being lost. They would not be the same people who had arrived at the motel months before. They had been broken in different ways and mended where it mattered. When they reached the corner where the city turned toward the neighborhoods, Lily stopped and looked back at the river. For a second, she could see the flash of black that had vanished, a small thing swallowed by water, and she thought of the cost of protecting the ones you love. She had been the one to throw the evidence away. She had been the one to choose an unclean escape for truth because it felt in the moment like the only way. Dante put a hand on her shoulder. "You did what you thought would keep them safe," he said. She let the words sit, then nodded. "And sometimes," she added, "that's enough." They walked on. The city turned its pages. The ledger waited for entries cautious and brave. The holiday lights came and went again, less theatrical than before and more humane. Men who had believed themselves untouchable learned that even ledgers could be opened, and that the signatures on those pages were, in the end, marks left by people trying to do better. The river kept moving, indifferent and necessary. The night became a memory that could be told without glamour but with truth. They had paid, they had kept, and, imperfectly, they had begun the slow work of repair. There were no clean endings, only the small, precise continuations of ordinary life. They learned to measure themselves by the way they stayed, the way they showed up, the way they preserved one another against the ledger's appetite. And in the dull, honest light of a city that had almost lost itself, they began again.